I'm going to talk for about 35 minutes. Craig's going to capture questions, so informally heckle from the sidelines, post questions in the chat, and hopefully we'll take as many of the questions as we can at the end. My goal is to try and stimulate some thinking. I like to go quite fast. These sessions are usually recorded, so to try and maximize the value you might get out, I'll go at speed, and then we can pick up any points that are triggered in your mind as we go through. So I'm going to try and make the links between energy, resilience, decision-making, governance, and what's going on for us and how we might need to change as leaders. So starting with this first slide, if I can move forward. Yeah, so you're all familiar with a curve like this, which is the accelerating pace of change. And I actually think we're living at one of the most exciting moments in human history. This is where we are at this inflection point. So, of course, the world's always changed throughout history, but the speed of the change now is something we've never seen before. It's exponential, and normally if you log an exponential curve, you get a straight line. But if you log the exponential curve we're all living through now, you continue to get an exponential curve, which means the exponential change is itself exponential. That's never happened in human history before. So this is really exceptional times. And there's upsides and downsides to this. Of course, one of the challenges living through these exceptional times is humanity's created a lot of problems for itself. I just want to highlight a few of them. These problems, in academic terms, they're called wicked issues, not wicked in the sense of evil, but wicked in the sense of super complicated and endemic. In fact, I've written a book called Wicked and Wise, How Do You Solve the World's Toughest Problems? Just give you a few examples, as you're all aware. Food safety and security, there are 2 billion people starving on the planet and 2 billion people obese. There's something wrong with our food system. And particularly around food safety and security, if you add that together with some of our healthcare practices, whether it's big pharma or international coordination, you can start to see the confluence of those two types of agenda as part of what the backdrop is to COVID. And certainly, as we're seeing the very sad images coming out of India, our international healthcare coordination is not great. Some nations are doing really well. Some nations are lagging way behind, not only in their basic provision of oxygen and ventilation, but their vaccination programs and so on. These are some of the issues that exist in the world. So in addition to food safety, security, healthcare issues, of course, once we come out the back of COVID, climate change will come back to the top of the agenda because we're halfway through the 6th great species extinction in the history of the planet. If you look at great news that Biden's rejoined America to the UN, to the Paris Climate Change Agreement, but all the evidence suggests we're not going to keep it to 1.5 degrees. It's currently looking like somewhere between 2.2 and 3 degrees, which will be catastrophic. So, which is why, the UK government has brought forward by 15 years our commitment to a zero net increase in carbon. The question, of course, is that going to be enough, and is it going to be soon enough? So that will come back on the agenda and will affect every organisation, sporting or corporate, in the world, as you see with the sports organisations that are involved in winter sports and snow. If there's no snow, difficult to prosecute your particular sport. So we could probably talk all day about the impact of climate change in the sporting world. It's one of many wicked problems. Here are the top 12: energy production, our addiction to fossil fuels. Democracy is clearly past its sell-by date. There's been a political regression going on globally in many countries around the world over the last 10 to 15 years, not least because of the corrupting influence of the lobby. So politics is a wicked issue. Capitalism, the obscene levels of inequality, and as a model, capitalism clearly past its sell-by date. Poverty, look around the world, 60% of all Mexicans live in poverty. It's said that most Americans are only 2 paychecks away from ruin, and 12% of America lives in below the poverty line. So we've got real issues with poverty. It seems that if you watch series like Dirty Money on Netflix, that deceit is the new currency of the powerful. So we've lost sight of the truth in this post-truth world and fake news. That's a big problem. And of course, as many of you know, Black Lives Matter, Me Too, LGBTQ, race, disability, discrimination, not only in sport, but in society, massive issue around the world. Criminal justice is a problem. US, for example, has 5% of the global population, 25% of the prison population, tantamount to modern slavery at this point. Big issues there. Immigration, 71 million refugees around the country, 50% of which are under 18. And of course, education, it continues to be a problem. 260 million uneducated people, and half of the planet who do go to education don't reach minimum proficiency. So I say all this not to depress you all, but to say, well, actually, given the accelerating pace of change and the number of complex issues, it's no wonder that many human beings feel like this. So this is to cite Bob Keegan, who is a Harvard educational professor, saying that given all of this going on in the world, many people feel, and his phrase is, in over their heads. That's why mental health and resilience and well-being is a major issue globally, because the world's speeding up and we are beset with a load of complex problems. So where does that leave us as individuals? What does that mean for me personally, my sporting organization? What it really means is we need to change. And that change comes at 3 levels. I'm going to talk about 2 of them. We need to change ourselves as leaders, how we think about the problem. And I'm going to dig into the game-changing nature of energy, emotions, and resilience. So I'm going to dig into a bit about that specifically. That's one of the things that we need to absolutely change. Obviously, if we're exhausted by the pandemic, by everything that's going on, if we don't have the basic energy to do what we need to do, we aren't going to succeed in reversing some of the problems we've created. If we're not managing our emotions effectively, we're not going to make good decisions, and we simply won't have the resilience as an individual human being. So I'm going to dig into a bit on that. We've got to, of course, change the way we connect with each other around the world. There's lots of stuff in that. I'm not going to touch on that so much today. And of course, we need to change the way we govern, make decisions, and do business. And I mean business in the broadest sense, whether it's a commercial entity you run or a sporting entity. We've got to change the way we do that. And so I'm going to dig in on these pink things about decision making and governance. So starting at the top, changing ourselves, which is where leadership really begins. Leadership is an inside-out journey. It starts with I, not with what I'm doing. It starts with me personally. So this is the operating model that we work with, whether we're coaching CEOs in big multinationals or potential Olympic gold medalists, is to say, look, what's common to both of you? A CEO wants better results, usually financial results. An athlete wants a medal. So if you're trying to create a better result, most people have realized that to do that, they need to focus on their behavior. So this is leadership behavior in organizations, antisocial behavior in society, or for an athlete, what am I doing? What's my program of activity that will lead me to a gold medal or to the cup or to the final? So most people have clocked that if you don't change what you're doing, you won't change the outcome, you won't change the result. So in order to change the result, we have to change what we're doing, what other people are doing. We've got to change behavior. But many of you will have realized changing behavior is not an easy thing. And one of the reasons it's not easy is whether people do or don't do anything is determined by things we can't see. That's the stuff below the line. What we can see is the behavior and the results we're getting as a result of those behavior, but we can't see what's driving behavior. So in the human system, what's really driving behavior is how people think. So when I'm coaching a professional athlete, if they think I'm an idiot, they're not going to do what I say. Why would they? I'm an idiot. Or if they think what I'm suggesting is nonsense, they won't do it. So I really have to understand what that athlete thinks or what that leader thinks in order to be able to change their behavior. I need to understand what they think about me, what they think about what I'm suggesting. So that's a bit more complicated. If I want to change the result, I have to change their behavior. To change their behavior, I have to change their thinking. I have to therefore uncover what they're thinking simply by asking them. And even if I ask them, they may not tell me the truth. So it's quite complicated. But imagine for a moment you could see, almost like on a computer printout screen next to everybody's head, what they were thinking. It still wouldn't be enough, because what human beings think is determined by something deeper in their system. So, and that basically is how people feel. There is, of course, a reciprocal relationship between thinking and feeling. Feeling affects thinking, and thinking affects feeling. There's a loop, it goes backwards and forwards. But as you can see from this diagram, how we feel has a much bigger effect on how we think than the reverse. So that's the dominant player in the interaction between thinking and feeling. Feeling is more dominant than thinking. And any parent will know that if they've sent their child into an exam and they've given that classic parental advice before the child goes into the exam: don't worry. Brilliant. Well, that's really helpful, isn't it? Now, even though that's intellectually correct, and by the way, the child realizes worrying isn't going to help them in the exam, you saying to the child, don't worry, doesn't improve their performance. Why? Because they feel worried, and that feeling will dominate their thinking. And the intellectual answer, don't worry, even though accurate, will not override that feeling of worry. If they're worried, they're worried. And so to change the outcome, you have to change that feeling of worry, and you can't do that with the thought, don't worry. And even if you've got a grip of people's feelings, it's still not enough, because there's something driving how human beings feel, and that's their emotion. So usually when I explain this to people, I make this critical distinction between feeling and emotion. They are not the same thing, but some people get lost at this point. In fact, frankly, some people got lost at the previous distinction. There are many human beings, particularly doctors and scientists, who don't understand the difference between a thought and a feeling. And you can test this. Go and ask people how they feel, and they'll often tell you how they think, because they don't understand the distinction. But to change the result, we've got to change behavior. To change behavior, we've got to change thinking. To change thinking, we have to change feeling. To change feeling, we actually have to change emotion. It's still not enough, because down in the basement of all of us, that's driving all of this, is our biology, our physiology. So there are multiple levels, 4 levels you cannot see, that determine whether people do or don't do anything. And if we haven't got a grip of all 4 levels, that's why you see a variance in performance. It's because there's stuff changing in these bottom 4 levels that we're not even aware of. So let me build it up from the bottom. So what's physiology? As many of you know, physiology is just data streams going around the body. So every biological system, whether it's the heart, the lungs, the guts, the liver, the spleen, all generates data. And this data comes in a variety of forms. So it comes as electrical data. So when our heart beats, it creates a spike of electricity. That's an electrical signal. We don't just generate electrical signals. You know, the heart creates a pressure wave. When our gut contracts, it creates a pressure wave called peristalsis. Also, if we listen to your stomach right now, maybe some of you had some toast for breakfast, put our ear to your stomach, we can hear sound waves. So all the bodily systems create lots of different types of signals: electrical signals, electromagnetic signals, chemical signals, pressure waves, sound waves, heat waves, light waves. So if you take all of those biological signals from every single biological system, that's what an emotion is. It's just the energy in motion. So every human being has an emotion every single second of every single day. So even men, you know, that's an emotion. It's just a composite biological signature. So what's a feeling? A feeling is the awareness in our mind of all that energy changing. So if we aren't tuned into that data, then all of that noise and turbulence that's going on in our biology, that's creating our emotions, if we don't feel it, then that turbulence affects our thinking without us realizing. And it affects 2 things in our thinking. It affects what we think and how well we think it. So it affects content and quality of consciousness. So our ability to make a good governance decision is massively impacted by our biology. If the biology is in chaos, then our ability to think clearly, come up with good answers and deliver those good answers is massively impaired. So our ability to be brilliant every day is hugely rooted in our biology and our emotion. That's why we've got to cultivate an awareness of our biology. And so when we're helping leaders or athletes get better results, we literally drop them down to the basement there in the physiology, and we'll teach people how to get control of their biology and their physiology, and then teach them how to get control of their emotions and tune into their emotions and understand what emotions they're feeling, and give them control of those bottom three levels. Once you've given them control of those bottom three levels, whether it's a leader or an athlete, then you can actually get consistent performance. The problem I've seen in the last 25 years with leaders and athletes is most of them can be brilliant sometimes, but they can't bring their A game every single day. Why not? They're not quite sure how they're delivering their A game. Sometimes they're on fire and they're having a massive effect in the world, and sometimes their performance is frankly dreadful. And for many people, that's a mystery. So that's why in the sporting context, we talk about a loss of form as though it's a complete mystery why these things happen. It's not really a mystery. It's just fluctuations in physiology and biology and emotions and feeling that affect the choice making at the thinking level, and then affect the actions in the world at the behavioral level, which then lead to the results. So it's possible to teach people how to get a grip of the biology and the emotion. So I just want to dig into that a little bit, if I may. Now, the human system is very complicated. There are thousands of signals going around the body. Now, in a complex system, whether it's a business, a sporting organization, or the human body, what we see is some signals are more important than others. In the human system, one of the most important signals is the electrical signal of the heart. So this is 5 heartbeats. So if you watch an ECG and the heartbeats going along the trace, what you can see is the distance between beats is constantly changing. This is something in science that's called heart rate variability. People are beginning to wake up to this. It's called HRV for short, heart rate variability. So your heart rate changes every single beat. Now, athletes for many years have been very obsessed with the average heart rate, but the average is not the critical data. So if we track your biology while I'm talking to you right now, you can see your biology is fluctuating between 60 and 100 beats per minute, and it's bobbling up and down. When we take the average, we might say the average heartbeat is 85 beats per minute. But when we average somebody's heart rate, and of course this is related to physical fitness, which is why athletes are interested in, when you average somebody's heart rate, you basically lose all the variance data. And it's the variance that matters. So if I can give you a metaphor, averaging the heart rate basically makes as much sense as listening to a piece of music and taking an average. So if we listen to Mozart, we'll find the average is da. But if we listen to Pearl Jam, we'll find the average is da. So we can't tell whether that music is Mozart or Pearl Jam because we've lost all the critical data. So the critical data is contained in the variation. Now, heart rate variability is critically important for business leaders and for athletes. And it's critically important for 3 reasons. Number one, it predicts health. So if you want to predict whether your athlete's going to get ill before the championship or before the final, you can measure their heart rate variability. Now, some sporting organizations have started to tune into this and started to track heart rate variability. And some of the algorithms they use are correct and some of them are wildly inaccurate. But the principle of heart rate variability to determine athletic performance, people are beginning to wake up. And also there's about 30,000 scientific papers in the academic literature all about using HRV to predict illness and even death. So in business, that's important for succession planning. But it's also important for, can the athlete make the final, or are they going to get a virus, or are they going to get ill? Now, when you've got an athlete wound fairly close to their optimal performance, often their health is quite fragile. You can use HRV to predict whether they're going to get ill before the major championships. But it also can be used to track deterioration and recovery. That's why HRV is important. So I've been telling organizations that for 25 years. Some of them are only just now beginning to wake up to the importance of that in sport and in business itself. But certainly in business, whilst that's sort of interesting to many, it's less relevant. Okay, so what's the second reason? The second reason HRV is important is because it gives you the ability to quantify energy. And so in an accelerating world that's beset by all these complex problems, as I said at the beginning, you need tons of energy. So as a leader, you need tons and tons of energy. And it's exhausting, particularly many people have experienced through the pandemic. It's incredibly exhausting, and they felt drained of their energy. But how do you get it back? Mysteriously, you're meant to recoup all your energy that night and go again tomorrow, and get it back and go again tomorrow. So energy management becomes unbelievably critical, not only for a leader, but also for an athlete. So when I was working with the GB Olympic squad coming into 2012 and 2016, we were trying to teach them the criticality of energy management. Because many of you know, if you overtrain and you get the training schedule wrong, you haven't got the energy on the day of the performance to deliver your PB. So we have to learn to manage that energy. Now, often we might talk about that in the gym, but one of the things I was trying to explain to many of the athletes is actually it matters more when you're not training. So what are you doing when you've left the gym, when you go home, and how effective is your energy management at that point? So we need to get into that. HRV can quantify how much energy you've actually got. Not how much you think you've got, but how much you've actually got. So we can quant that by measuring HRV over 1 or 3 days. So that's the second reason why HRV is really important. But the third reason, which I think in many ways is the most interesting to all of you, is HRV affects your ability to think clearly. Now, the reason you do well in your career is basically down to the quality of your thinking. So if you can problem solve any issue, whether it's to do with a sporting dilemma, a governance dilemma, a wicked issue dilemma, the better the quality of your thinking, the more likely you are to proceed well in your career. If you're on a soccer field, you'll be able to see the pass, you'll see the skiing line, whatever. That is hugely dependent on your quality of your thinking, and HRV affects the quality of your thinking. And the reason it does that, as I'm talking to you right now, your heart is generating this sort of chaotic looking signal and inputting it up the vagus nerve into your brain. Now, when you put an individual human being, either in a corporate environment or a sporting environment, under increasing pressure, the signal becomes more and more chaotic. As the signal becomes more chaotic, what happens is it shuts off your frontal lobes and you have what we call a DIY lobotomy. So human beings will lobotomize themselves under pressure. This is the red mist that comes down that leads to red cards or to outbursts of violence on the pitch. And in the cold light of day, when sanity returns, people make different choices. But under the heat of competition, people often make bad choices, whether they're leaders, leading governance bodies. All human beings are at mercy of a lobotomy under pressure. Particularly difficult is that once you've lobotomized yourself, you don't even realize you've lobotomized yourself half the time. Why? Because your frontal cortex function has disappeared. So you think you're performing quite well. You might think you're making good governance decisions. But how would you know if your perceptual awareness is impaired by your lobotomy? So it becomes a catch-22. Now, the only way of getting out of that trap is to change the quality of that fuel going into your brain, going from two-stroke petrol to rocket fuel. If you put rocket fuel, or what's known in the trade as a coherence signal, the smart thinking comes back in because the frontal lobes turn back on. So the journey to being brilliant every single day starts by controlling the biology and inputting your frontal lobes with a much higher quality signal, so it turns the lights back on. So in any meeting, whether you're trying to decide, on some governance issue, if your brain is shut down, it might take you twice as long to get to a decent decision, or you may not get to it at all if your brain's shut down. But if you can control your biology, generate some coherence, not only will you get to a better decision, but you'll get to a better decision quicker. So you'll enable you to go further and faster, and the game changer is managing your energy and your biology and learning to generate some coherence. So that's at the base of the pyramid. That's where the journey starts. And how you do that is with some simple breathing techniques. Now, it's not deep breathing. There are 12 parameters to the breath that you can learn to control, but it's not deep breathing. So when coaches say to athletes, take a few deep breaths, my advice is don't do that. It won't help your brain function. What you really need is a few rhythmic breaths. So it's not deep breathing, it's rhythmic breathing. So when I was teaching the GB rowing squad, it's breathing in a rhythmic fashion. Or many of you, if you've ever been running, getting the breath in rhythm with the pace, the cadence of your muscles is terribly important. So if you've ever been running and you've had a fly hit the back of your throat, which disrupts your breathing pattern, you lose muscular power. You have to slow down as you cough and splutter. So the power goes. So actually rhythmic breathing rather than deep breathing is much more helpful to you. So I'm not going to go into all the details of that. I've written books about it. You can read them. So it starts with stabilizing your biology. But once you've stabilized your biology, most of the game is then at the next level up, which is the emotions and the feelings. So I just want to dig into that a little bit. Now, what we've seen is the biggest myth in performance training for athletes is that some coaches try to get their athletes psyched up before the big game or the big match or the final. And then other coaches will say, no, you've got to be relaxed under pressure. So you get both types of advice. Some are advising essentially to get pumped up, get the adrenaline going, hit their chest before they go on, get themselves psyched up. And others are going, no, you've got to not pump out lots of adrenaline. You've got to be chilled in the face of the threat. So rather than hit the pedal to the metal on the accelerator, you've got to increase the brake fluid. The brake fluid is a different chemical. It's called acetylcholine. So this is the sympathetic nervous system. For those of you with biological knowledge, this is the parasympathetic nervous system at the bottom. And you get both types of advice. Now, neither is true. Your actual performance doesn't depend on how fast your heart is going or how slow your heart is going. What it really depends on is this horizontal axis. Your performance depends on whether you're generating a positive emotion to the left or a negative emotion to the right. Different chemistry is created. So on the positive side, you create a hormone called DHEA, dihydroepiandrosterone, the molecule that makes testosterone in men and estrogen in women. That's an anabolic hormone. You can buy it on the internet. It's a banned substance in the Olympics. Why? Because it's a performance enhancer. But you don't need to buy it on the internet. You can learn to generate much higher levels of DHEA yourself, which I'm going to come on to. So you want high levels of DHEA. What you don't want is high levels of the stress hormone cortisol, because that creates catabolic states. So in every human being, we're balancing cortisol and DHEA. Now, if you feel bad, you will increase your cortisol levels, which will make you feel bad, which will increase your cortisol, which will make you feel bad, which will increase your cortisol, and you will create a vicious cycle, whether you're running a company or an organization or you're a sports person. Now, the opposite is also true. If you're on the left-hand side here and you score a goal and you feel great, you create more DHEA, which makes you feel more positive. You create more DHEA, which makes you feel more positive, and you create a virtuous cycle, which is why some teams will have winning streaks on the left and losing streaks on the right. This is not form, this is biology. So if we can live our life on the left-hand side, we're much more likely to maintain form. Why? Because we're generating positive emotions, we're generating anabolic hormones, DHEA, which increases muscular power, it increases efficiency, and so on. So the knack is to live our life on the left-hand side. That's true in sport, it's just as true in business. So you'll see sales teams that once they've made one sale, they'll make 3 sales. And you'll see sales teams on the right that once they've lost 1 sale, they'll lose 3 sales. So whether it's sport or business, what actually determines your performance is whether you're on the left-hand side or the right-hand side. So when you heat a system up, you can heat it up into a high energy positive or a high energy negative. So the sorts of emotions up here on the top left, things like passion, enthusiasm, motivation, commitment, determination, exuberance. And on the top right, angry, frustrated, anxious, worried, irritated, aggressive. So what matters really is whether you're top left or top right. Now, many human beings can't make that distinction. So you'll often see sports people erroneous claim that they produce their best golf when they're angry. And the reason people say that is they can't make the difference. They can't figure out the difference between anger and determination. You never play your best golf when you're angry, but you might play your best golf when you're determined, which is over the left. But I think it's anger because I can't distinguish determination from anger. It's just a high energy state. So it's really, really important for leaders to be able to determine whether they're top left or top right. Now, depending on where you are, top left or top right, when you've finished performing, whether it's a business person or a sports person, you've got to recuperate. So you've got to cool your system down. But there are 2 versions of cool down. There's low energy positive or low energy negative. Which one are you doing? So we saw many of these Olympic athletes in 2012 and 2016. They could get passionate, but when they went home from the gym, they would go bottom right and they'd start to vegetate on the couch. So when they heated up the next day, they'd go up to the top right rather than the top left. So vegetation is not recuperation. And you'll see the same thing, people who are running organizations. If we've had a really intense day, is we collapse on the couch and where we should be going is bottom left, into states like contentment, receptivity, curiosity, equanimity, serenity, tranquility, those types of states. And the states to avoid are apathy, inattention, indifference, disengagement, those types of states. So what really determines our ability to perform is get the right energy and get the right emotion going so we can get the right biology, so we can create virtuous cycles. So we should be living our life between the top left and the bottom left. Unfortunately, many people are living their lives between the top right and the bottom right. And that's the super highway to the diseases that we all suffer, all the modern diseases, pretty much all of them. If you run a high cortisol and low DHEA, you increase your risk of heart disease, cancer, diabetes, senile dementia, and many others, because we're running too high a cortisol and too low a DHEA. The good news is you can train your system to live on the left-hand side, high levels of positive energy, and then recuperating with positive lower energy states in the evening or at the weekend. So we should be vacillating on the left-hand side. Most people are vacillating on the right-hand side. And the worst place to be is the bottom right, because these people in an organization you don't notice because they're not making a noise. The squeaky wheels that you do notice, the people who are complaining about something, are top right. And usually if they're in the top right, they're still somewhat committed, which is why they're upset. So converting people from the top right to the left-hand side is easier than converting people from the bottom right. The bottom right, the people who've given up, they think it's hopeless and helpless, and they've gone to the bottom right. Now, one of the difficulties in helping people to become much more emotionally resilient is they don't have the emotional literacy. They don't know where they are in this universe. So when I ask people to make a list of what emotions do you know, what emotions do you recognize, and I could do that and give you 5 minutes to write down all the emotions you may have noticed in your own system over the last week. I give you 5 minutes to do that. Most people don't get more than a dozen emotions. And of course, the truth is there are 34,000 emotions. Most people don't know more than a dozen. So we are completely and utterly illiterate. We cannot distinguish one emotion from another most of the time. So when you actually ask people on a daily basis, how are you? And they reply, fine, that's a guess. They don't really know whether they're fine or not. So sometimes, just to be a bit mischievous, I'll say, okay, you say you're fine, but are you really fine? Are you fine, or are you not bad? Or are you all right? Or are you okay? Or are you so-so? Do you even know the difference between fine, not bad, okay, all right, and so-so? Do you even know the difference between those states? To which most people reply, what? They can't distinguish. Why not? Emotionally illiterate. So most human beings have got a massive task ahead to be able to distinguish these emotions. So in this universe of emotions, as we call it, there are 17,000 roughly positive emotional states, 17,000 negative emotional states. And if you don't know which planet you're on in the universe of emotions, you're lost. And that's where most people are. They're not quite sure where they are, and therefore it's difficult for them to navigate around the system. So that's one of the big problems. And the second big problem is they actually believe their emotional state is down to somebody outside of themselves, which is why people will say to each other, you upset me, you did it to me. And I keep reminding people, nobody's doing anything to anybody. Because when somebody gets frustrated, and by the way, frustration is the commonest emotion in business by a factor of 4. The emotion of frustration is 4 times more common than any other emotion. So when we feel frustrated, nobody is injecting us with chemicals or forcing us to take tablets that creates the biology of frustration. No, we're doing that ourselves. We are doing this to ourselves. We are creating that chemistry within ourselves. Nobody's doing it to us. Somebody might be behaving badly in front of us, but we're effectively creating the chemistry ourselves. And when we create that negative chemistry, it shuts our brain down. So we are the architects. So that was encapsulated when I was speaking at a conference by one of the conference attendees doing a cartoon, where I said, remember, stop pointing the finger at other people and blaming them for how you feel, because they are not the cause of it, you are. When I was teaching my 4 boys this, I was trying to teach them to stop pointing the finger. I say, remember, when you're pointing the finger at others, 3 fingers are pointing at the real culprit, which is right here. So I taught my sons that. They now point at me with 4 fingers. Say, it's your fault, Dad, you did it. Anyway, that's a joke. What I'm really saying is, if we can accept the simple truth that we are the architect of our own emotions, not other people, then we can change our own emotions. And that is an unbelievable game changer, because it moves us from the victim position. We're a victim of others, our boss, our colleagues, other athletes, the government, the world, the market, somebody else. If we can stop being victims, if we can take back the ownership of our own biology, of our own emotions, of our own feelings, then we've got the possibility of changing them. If we think somebody else is causing all of that, we can't change it, because they're in charge of our emotions, not us. So that's a game-changing switch, and it's particularly game-changing for the ability to make a decision. So I have 2 more slides. If I'm not sure how I'm doing for time, Craig, but I've got 2 more slides I want to just share with you. So the link between this, the biology and your control of your biology and your emotional state and governance is unbelievably critical. So if you look at any leader, if you're running a sporting organization, you're looking forward into your life and you're mainly dealing with the day-to-day challenges. So in business, that's things like revenue, it's products, it's services, it's scorecards, it's competitive radar, it's operational risks, it's talent management systems. We're driving all of that, which is today's performance, or you're spending some of your time thinking about the vision of the future for your organization, or the ambition for your organization, the purpose of your organization, the strategy of your organization. And I'm going to come to this just as a final thing, the governance of that organization. That's the leadership of the market you're in tomorrow. So most leaders are obsessed by the operational performance today and the future. These agendas, these 2 agendas are what we call it. What is it that we're doing? And most leaders are it addicted. They're obsessed by it, and it tends to just be the short-term it, which is why governance is critical, because governance is a huge part of building the future. What we pay less attention to is this area that's over our right shoulder, which is stuff like cultural transformation, company values, leadership teams, relationship ecosystems. That's the stuff of people leadership, or what we might call we. And over our left shoulder is other stuff we don't pay attention to, which is some of the things we've been talking about today: energy, resilience, well-being. Often the agenda or the conversation around resilience and well-being is an it thing. What are we doing? Have we got a corporate gym? Are we putting out fruit and apples? So despite all those well-intentioned initiatives, the data gets worse. So we've actually got to dig inside ourselves, not just change the system around us. We've got to control our energy and our emotional state to change this pink stuff. But it's the quality of thinking, it's the maturity and sophistication that we operate with. It's our personal brand. This is our personal performance, or what you might call I. So I've talked a little bit about energy and resilience and well-being. Finally, I just want to say something very quickly about governance, but there is tons of stuff we can improve in our organizations. If you look at when our biology is scrambled, our ability to govern and make effective decisions is significantly impaired. So as a final slide, I just want to say something about the evolution of governance and the evolution of decision making. So if you look at go back to the time when we were a caveman, and cavemen's ability to navigate an increasingly complicated world, most societies started at anarchy, every man, woman, dog for themselves, very individualistic, and eventually mob rule and tribalism kicks in, not very sophisticated, doesn't handle much complexity, but at least we've got, a few people involved in the decision making. Eventually, most systems get to an autocratic position. So you'll see many sporting organizations, many Premiership football clubs, they have one big, powerful autocrat at the top. Many years ago, this was the default position of many businesses. There's still many businesses run by an autocrat today. So at the governing body, at the exec or leadership team, you've got one person, the king or the queen, making all the calls. And then you've got 9 people who are feeling done to. So it's very good for speed because you've only got one person to consult. So the autocrat will listen to the debate and then overrule everybody or give direction. So you can move fast, but you can't handle much complexity. What happens is that most people will have experienced some sort of co-leadership, particularly if they're parents. This is the family. This is 2 heads are better than 1. So you've got mum and dad, or the king and the queen, hence monarchy. It's also the way that oligarchies usually operate, or theocracies operate. Archie Norman, Alan Leighton in a business, it's co-leadership, the CEO, the CFO. Co-leadership, 2 heads are better than 1, so it can handle double the complexity, but it creates a court where these 8 people are constantly trying to put a wedge between mum and dad. So it has its own pathology. It can handle double the complexity of an autocrat, but there's still problems with it. And then most modern systems have jumped forward massively. They treble their ability to handle complexity. So we get some kind of democratic process. So the way that many systems are now governed is we'll have a vote. We'll have a vote around the board table, motion carried. That's a 6v4. But the operating principle of democracy is popularity. It's basically a volume play. So if you have enough votes, your decision becomes the de facto decision. Meritocracy, by the way, also operates this way, which is a slight variation based on persuasion rather than popularity. But baked into democracy is 4 people who are permanently rendered offside. So democracy bakes in dissent. So those 4 people spend their entire time trying to steal 2 votes and swing the power back to themselves, which is why many people report, I can't believe the politics in this organization. The politics are driving me nuts. Well, that's because you're operating democratically and you've baked in the dissent, which is why you get flip-flopping in political systems, Labour, Tory, or Republican, Democrat. It flip-flops backwards and forwards, and you've baked in a lot of dissent. Now, as Churchill said, democracy is the best system in the world apart from all the others, suggesting that actually it's not that great. And actually, there is a level beyond democracy. There is actually 3 levels beyond democracy. Sociocracy is an attempt to get to a greater level of alignment, but it usually fails because you get stuck in consensual hell. So then it drops back down to democracy, reinforcing the mistaken belief that the democratic process is the best thing in the world for governance and for decision making, which it is not. It's possible to develop something called holacracy, where you get to 10-0, or something called crowdocracy, where you get to 10,000 v0, which is basically alignment on a massive scale. So if you want to read about that, and actually if we implemented crowdocracy, a lot of the politics that people hate in complex systems would disappear. So this is a way of unlocking the wisdom of the crowd. Now, if you don't know how to unlock the wisdom of the crowd, you will get the mob, you will get mob rule, and you'll get dumbing down, and you'll get averaging, and you'll get poor quality decision making. So if you understand how to unlock the wisdom of the crowd and operate crowdocratically, you get much higher quality decisions. So the operating principle of crowdocracy is wisdom, not volume. So there are, to offer you a little bit of hope at the end of this, there are ways of governing way beyond the sophistication of democracy, which will give us better quality answers to the wicked problems we're generating. So I've tried to canter through very quickly all of this sophistication. You cannot operate crowdocratically if your biology is all over the place, your emotions are unregulated, and your frontal lobes have disappeared. You haven't got a cat and hell's chance of operating crowdocratically. So you need to get control of your biology and your emotional state so you can get control of your consciousness. As you get control of your consciousness, one can start to understand how do we get north of democracy and invent better governance processes that give us much wiser answers to the wicked problems we're facing. So that's probably enough for today, Craig. If you want additional resources, just look me up online. I've written a number of books which you can access off Amazon.